Absolutely. And so, like, if you have a really weak section, maybe your clarinets are really weak this year, man, in the fall, you want to be challenging them like crazy. But then in the spring, you want to pick music that they can be successful on. So you got to know, like, which groups are you trying to challenge and what's your goal. I feel like in the fall, you can be much more of a teaching mode and trying to shore up your weaknesses. And then in the spring, you really want to be showing off your strengths as much as possible.
I like that. You are listening to the Music Ed Mentor podcast, where we teach music educators how to build, manage, and grow thriving school music programs and have long and happy careers. Welcome to episode 4 of the Music Ed Mentor podcast. I am your host, Elisa Jones. You can follow my music education blog at professionalmusiceducator.com, and I invite you to join us in the online Facebook group, Music Educators Off the Podium, to connect with other school music teachers and find tips and tricks to make your life easier as a music teacher. In this episode, my guest is Tamari Sager, author of the blog and the podcast, Crossing the Break. Tamari is also an assistant band director whose focus has been really getting set up for a successful year before the school year even starts. So it should come as no surprise to you that our discussion today is all about those things you can do now to ensure you'll have the most successful year teaching music that you've ever had. I want to give a special shout out to all the new music teachers just taking on their very first jobs this coming year. Congratulations! Welcome from all of your colleagues around the nation. I know you'll find all of us willing to give you some awesome advice and positive support as you embark on your career. We all went through a first-year teaching experience, and we empathize with you completely, but know that you are going to do a great job. If you're looking for some more great ideas to make your job as a music teacher easier, if you're looking for advice and teaching resources, check out the smartmusic.com blog. They have guest posts from music teachers around the country covering subjects from trombone embouchure to fundraising to pretty much anything you can think of. My biggest tip for all of you is to subscribe to all your favorite blogs and websites, then create files in your email manager for each topic of discussion. So one for beginning clarinet playing, for example, or maybe you're teaching choir and you need one that's all about how to get choir supplies or copyright rules. Then when you get an email update, just file the content under the topic right in your email for easy searching when you're ready for it. With that top tip out of the way, I hope you're ready with a paper and pen for some serious note-taking on this episode. If you're listening where you can't write, don't worry. I've created a back-to-school blueprint for you to download that covers all of the advice in this episode. You can also access that download on the smartmusic.com blog or go to professionalmusiceducator.com/podcast. Now let's jump in with Tamari.
I'm Tamari Sager, and I live in the Austin area. I've been band director and private lesson teacher for, 17 years now. I also taught elementary music for a few years in there, and I'm going to be an assistant band director again next year after teaching lessons for quite a while. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm in Austin with my family. I have a great husband and 2 young kids. So that's about what we do.
And you have at least one blog website. You want to tell us about that?
Yes. So crossingthebreak.com is the website, and it's a podcast that is very nuts and bolts of teaching clarinet, starting from like the beginning of day one, actually before day one. And I've gone up in intermediate so far. I plan to do a little bit more on advanced in the next year or two, but mostly beginning and intermediate is where I kind of stay right now. And then I also help contribute to Band Directors Talk Shop, which is a collaborative website with lots of different directors from all around the country that contribute. And so there I tend to contribute clarinet and private lesson information and some motivational things for band kiddos.
Well, I am so excited to have you as my guest today. We are going to be talking about macro planning your school year and which things you should be thinking about before school starts, just to kind of set yourself up for major success. So we're going to go through about 7 items here that music teachers, and we're going to kind of cover the whole gambit of elementary to band and orchestra, secondary. and stuff like that. So should be great information today for every one of our listeners. So let's just jump in. I'm going to introduce each line item and then I'm going to let you elaborate and then I'll come back and if I need to say anything else. Does that sound good?
That sounds great.
All right. So number one, plan your curriculum. And this is whether you use a curriculum map or your district has a set curriculum or maybe you purchased a music curriculum. Plan them out, lay it out on your calendar and plan backward from there.
Yes. So I suggest having a calendar where you look at, say you have a band performance or an orchestra performance, look at that and look at when you're going to start on that music. So say the performance is your winter concert. It's the beginning of December. You plan to start on that the beginning of November. I would say put a note on your calendar in at least mid-October, maybe before that, to start selecting your music. So start looking at the sections you have and where your strengths and weaknesses are. And depending on the concert, what you're trying to achieve with that concert. So if it's a winter concert, that's not like a be all end all. It's not a big contest, so you can use that more for teaching. So look at selecting music that you can use for teaching. So give yourself time to really look through music and pick the right literature, because that's a huge part of being successful. And so 2 to 3 weeks before you're going to pass it out, select the music. And then maybe a week before, go and start copying it. So you don't want to be in the music library 3 days before you're supposed to start on this music for a concert, just grabbing stuff, hoping you find something lucky. That also gives you an opportunity to talk to other teachers about, tell them your strengths and weaknesses of your sections and get their suggestions on literature. So, and then once you obviously you want to have it all prepared and ready to pass out to the kids in plenty of time for the concert. But I think you can actually back it up farther than that and start selecting your music earlier. Also, when you're selecting your music, you want to look at the overall school schedule. So look at your testing. I know in the spring, we had a really late concert this year. We actually had a concert on the last day of school.
Wow.
But when you look at that, the number of days we actually got to rehearse were so small because you have all the STAR testing. In Texas, we call it STAR. You have all the standardized testing, and you have field trips all over the place. You have field days, you have all that kind of stuff. So make sure you take that into account. So we luckily started the music earlier than we thought we would need to, but we still were just scrambling to get it together. So, really look at the overall school schedule when you're planning things, and take that into consideration. And then also for elementary music, you want to make sure you consider the classroom teachers' schedules. So if you're going to be asking the classroom teachers, I need all the fourth graders to come and practice together for this program, make sure that you give yourself time to work with their schedule, and give yourself time to have those group rehearsals. So it's not just about how much time you need, but it's about how much time the school schedule will need as well.
Yeah, and I think taking into account locations too. Like all of my elementary performances are in the gym. And so if I need to schedule a practice, I need to book out the gym for that day. And that usually requires talking to the gym teachers,
Absolutely. And I would say as much of that as you can do before school starts, do it before school starts. So if you have on your calendar that you're going to have a performance on March 5th, talk to the gym teacher before school starts about, okay, this week of March, when can I be in there? And the earlier you can get those things scheduled, the better.
Yeah, totally agree. And I love what you said about having a goal for each concert so that you're really basing your curriculum off of what you're wanting to accomplish and demonstrate at the concert.
Absolutely. And so if you have a really weak section, maybe your clarinets are really weak this year, man, in the fall, you want to be challenging them like crazy. But then in the spring, you want to pick music that they can be successful on. So you got to know which groups are you trying to challenge and what's your goal. I feel like in the fall, you can be much more of a teaching mode and trying to shore up your weaknesses. And then in the spring, you really want to be showing off your strengths as much as possible.
I like that.
And then one other thing I have on here is with individual performances. So I'm real big on the individual student. That probably comes because I've mostly been an assistant band director. So my position has been a lot with working with individual kids. But, you've got district music. You want to plan those assignments before school starts and be ready for that. You want to plan any kind of playoffs that you're going to have and solo ensembles. So at one of my schools that I was at, our solo ensemble was the first week of February, which meant we wanted the kids to have their solos in their hands before winter break. And we gave every student a different solo. And then, so we had to start picking those solos right after Thanksgiving, Well, Thanksgiving was right after our region band audition. So basically, we did all region band, and the very next couple days, we started pulling out solos. And so luckily, the teacher I was with knew that that was a routine. But sometimes you've got to really be kind of like a juggler, and you're juggling a lot of different things. So the more that before school starts, you can look at that calendar, write yourself notes on the calendar about when you need to be preparing so that when school gets going, you don't lose track and drop any of those balls that you're trying to keep in the air.
Yeah, that's great advice. And with my business background, I love teaching people about a Gantt chart. It's just a project tracking tool, and you can actually download like a Gantt chart template for Microsoft Excel or PowerPoint, and you say like what needs to happen, the starting date, and you plug in how long it takes, and it will just lay all of that out on the calendar for you. And so you can actually look at any given day and see all of the tasks that need to be done that day. And it's just a super handy tool, Gantt chart. I'll add that into the podcast show notes actually, where you can download that.
Sounds amazing. That's like totally how my mind works. So I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, I totally need to just like every day, just tell me what to do,
Yeah.
Okay, so that takes us to, so that was number one, which was plan your curriculum and lay it out on your calendar. Number two, consider your classroom layout, making sure that you have plenty of room, that the kids have room to move. Even if you're in a sit down, chair and stand ensemble, it's still really great to have lots of room around each kid so that you can access them, so that if they need, you want to get them up and moving, they can without too much trouble, which I know might be hard in Texas, especially because you guys have really big groups, right?
We do. Luckily, a lot of us have big band halls, but yes, sometimes you have to be pretty creative with where your kids are sitting.
Nice. And then I read on the blog about using name tags on the stands.
Absolutely. I love that. I didn't say in the intro, but I took a kind of an interim position this spring. And that was the one thing I showed up with. I started like mid-January. It wasn't even a normal day to start. And I showed up and I had like my purse and my name tags. That was what I had because I wanted name tags for every kid. And so I got that ahead of time. And what I do is it's just like an 8.5 by 11 paper that's folded over. And I like them to be able to take notes on the back, and I put their name on the front. And that's how I, at first, learned their names. But I use it for all kinds of other motivational things, like giving them stickers when they're doing the right thing. I sign initials, if I see them even just sitting up, different things like that. So it really helps with classroom management in a positive way. But that's one of the things that I would have a hard time starting my first day of school without having name tags ready for every kid for their stands.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that tip. So what are some other things we should consider with classroom layout?
So I like to just look at the flow of the room and think about where the kids are going to enter and exit. So some band halls just have one door, but a lot of band halls have like 2 entry and exit points. So deciding how that's going to work, if you're going to have kids enter and exit certain doors, decide things like where do their backpacks go during band, so they're not tripping over it. They're going to, especially band and orchestra, they're carrying very expensive instruments. You don't want them tripping. So where are the backpacks going to go so they're out of the way? Where are the cell phones going to go? All that kind of stuff. You can even have tape on the floor for chairs. Some people do that. You just have to be real careful that it can come up, but that can help with where the chairs are going to go, and with it can eliminate some of your setting up chairs and stands if you have ways that the kids can adjust things. I would also suggest leaving an aisle in the middle, how we talked about, being able to get in and around the kids, so that you can get up and down in the middle of the ensemble. And you could do that with band, choir, or orchestra. When you assign lockers, I would try to spread out the students in one class. So for example, in your beginning clarinet class, don't put all the clarinets within 2 rows of lockers. If possible, you want to spread them out where they're not literally on top of each other. You don't want a kid taking a clarinet out of a top locker, dropping it on a kid that's below them. So the more you can spread out lockers or cubbies or wherever your instrument storage is, that's great. For elementary music, I used to have, at the beginning of the year, we would practice, like they would come in, they would have an assigned seat in kind of rows just on the floor. But then when we would go to like a circle game, we would practice that. And that would be an activity. Like we would learn how to go to the circle as quickly and efficiently as possible. We would learn how to get in 2 lines for folk dancing as quickly and efficiently as possible. So they kind of had multiple assigned spaces or areas. So the first week or 2 of school, we spent a lot of time learning how to do that as well. And then I would just say anything where kids are coming in and out of a room, any kind of transition, that's when your discipline problems can happen. So it can really help with classroom management if you are where you can see, wherever your instrument room is, make sure you can see that area. Wherever you're going to have the kids coming in and out, getting music, all that kind of stuff, make sure you're visible and that you have the logistics to where you can be in there and be visible. And that can help with your classroom management as well, having a clear routine for that.
Yeah, and for elementary kids, I actually have them practice coming in and leaving the classroom, like the lining up thing. And we make it fun, of course, we add little singing games and stuff, but we practice how to come in and out. And I was just reminded, my first year at a new school, I had 240 kids that I was seeing each week, and I didn't know any of their names. And so, and I don't have chairs and stands. My classroom, in fact, has no seating except for the floor. And so I used 3x5 cards, actually. And so that allowed me I'd bring the kids in, they'd sit in a circle, and they would actually find their name card. So I'd lay out their little 3x5 card, and they would sit by it. And that's how I learned their names really quickly, too.
Yes, my last year I did something similar to that. I didn't keep doing it long enough. I should have kept it going longer. But the idea of having, even with them, they did have an assigned seat and I had a list of their names, at least in my hand, to coordinate it with the kids. But having that visual where you see the kid, you see the name, I just think that's invaluable.
Yeah, super, super good stuff. So that takes us to number 3, which is sequencing. And that's planning out what you're going to teach and when. So we all know that we should start with tone, and tone is the most important thing, whether we're singing or we're playing instruments or whatever we're doing. So let's talk a little bit about sequencing our curriculum.
Yes. So as far as beginning band, especially, because that's kind of my focus on my podcast and things like that. There's a great mentor, Randy Story, that one time I asked him, okay, what is the most important thing you want kids to get out of beginning band? And he said, number 1, a good attitude about band, which was interesting because you never hear anyone say that. And he was saying, of course, they need to have a good attitude or they're not going to stay in band. So I agree with that.
That's great.
As well. Yeah. And then he said, well, number 2 would be tone. And number 3 would be tone. And number 4 would be tone. And then we were all kind of laughing a little bit by then. He said, and number 5 is everything else. Like he really didn't care. He wanted them to have a good attitude about band and he wanted tone, tone, tone. And most people say that. And I think we all kind of know that, but it's so easy to forget that. So just make yourself go slowly and take the time to get all the fundamentals. And tone, of course, means all those basics like the embouchure and the air and all those things. So just taking the time to do that and focusing on things that are important. And I kind of, when I was thinking about this, I related to like my kids, they're only young once and you only get them in that stage where they're little babies or they're little toddlers. You only get them once and they grow up really fast and you never get that time back. And that's how I feel about the beginning of the year and especially beginning band. You have that 1 year to really teach them to play with a good sound. And then they get in the full band and you start talking about ensemble sound. So it's not that you don't focus on it, but of course you focus on it. But same thing at the beginning of the year, you only have that, first 6 weeks, one time every year. And you want to really make sure that you're getting the right habits established during that time.
Yeah, I was always taught and practiced when I taught, I used to teach band and orchestra as well. And the whole thing that I would think of is that my groups should be able to sound as good as a professional group. If I have a choir, even if they're in, 5th, 6th grade, they should be able to sound with the same tone quality as like the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, because they may not have all of the same musical skills, but tone quality wise, your band can sound just as good as a full grown army band, as
Right.
long as you have those basics of sound in place.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that's an important one. Okay, so let's just do a quick review. Number 1, plan your curriculum requirements and layout on your calendar. Number 2, consider your classroom layout. Number 3, remember sequencing and get that all planned. Number 4 is be prepared. Have all the supplies you may need on hand before the first day of school. And it helps to go through each section of your ensemble and really consider what you need to optimize your teaching and their learning. So collecting materials for each of the concepts that you need for this whole year and having that toolbox ready to go.
Yes. And we in the band world and orchestra as well, we have a lot of school-owned instrument things to get ready too. So with elementary music, I spent more time, I felt like, preparing the room and doing some, manipulative things for more that I was going to use for my own teaching, and very little that I actually had to prepare for the individual student. Whereas with secondary, and especially band and orchestra, you got to spend time getting instruments ready and getting supplies and things like that. So you want to make sure that you're thinking ahead on that and you have all that ready so that you're not wasting teaching time dealing with it. So getting school and instruments assigned to students, make sure that they're all working, make sure they're in good shape, getting music copied and having all of that ready. I even would recommend copying basically everything you'll need for either the whole year or the first semester. If there's stuff, like I use the same clarinet warm up every year. And so I don't know when I'm going to give that to them exactly. It might be October, but I'm going to use it. And so I can go and make copies. I know how many kids are in my class. I can get all that ready so that, in October when it's busy, I've already got it ready to go and I'm not waiting till I can get down to the copy room to make copies. And same thing with activities. If you're going to do theory activities or anything like that, or if you keep those as backups for days where if you have like all of your band beginning students together, you don't have just individuals, or maybe days where you're going to work more with one section, you want to have some work for others to do, have all that ready to go. And then also make sure you have a substitute lesson plan. You never know when, things are going to happen. I have a real good friend who had to miss the first 2 days of school this year because her child was real sick. So make sure you've got, backup plans and things like that all ready to go before the first day of school.
Yeah, totally great advice there. I love having the sub-lesson plans in place because you just really do never know. So, Tamari, what are some of your favorite teaching tools to have in the classroom?
Well, so for clarinet, first of all, at the beginning of the year, I use very little as far as supplies. Like we don't even use stands. They just need a chair. That's all they need, a chair. And then pretty soon they need their instrument. We actually don't even usually play on the instruments for a while, but it's very minimal. I don't give them anything to look at except a mirror. We do need a mirror definitely for band. I think every kid, if they can see their face, they're going to do better with correcting it. So, and then eventually we start adding stands and things like that. For clarinets, I have some things I specifically recommend, and I can probably give you the link to this to add to the show notes, but mouthpiece patches I think are super helpful. The thumb savers, I use pencil grips for those because it's cheaper and soft. So little things like that I know, again, I don't know when I'm going to use them, but I know I'm going to use them. I go ahead and order that. I use tape. I used painter's tape, but just masking tape too for different things. Like on flute, I use that for where they're going to position, where they're going to actually touch the instrument. Some things like that I like to have on hand. I also like having silver Sharpies to put their names. Most kids don't use metronomes in the true metronome form anymore. They use their apps, but we used to have black metronomes a lot. And so silver Sharpies are great when you have to write something permanent on a black material. So those are some of the things that we use a lot at the beginning.
Nice. Love it. So number 5 is have a thorough lesson plan template. So I know that a lot of times as much as we can macro plan our school year, we still are going to have to, adapt as we go based on how quickly the kids are learning. But if we can have a template and a routine in place that you can just quickly plug and play which exercises you're going to do, which pieces you're going to be working on, then that's going to really give you a good boost.
Yes. And so my kids, and it changes a little bit as we go through the year, but they basically know when they come in band, we're going to do, this and then this and then this and then this. And we will increase the difficulty as the year goes on, but like we're always going to count every day. And we're always going to, at the beginning, first semester, we always play on mouthpiece first and these different things like that. So, and I would say the first few weeks, because you haven't developed that routine yet, it does take a little while to over plan as much as you can. Plan just minute by minute if needed. But be flexible. And if you get off schedule, that's okay. You may only get through half of the things you wanted, but just make sure you've over planned so you know. And then once the routine gets set, I don't really think of my class as 50 minutes. I think of it as lots of different sections of 6 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever those kinds of things are. And so that helps with the flow of the class because everything just kind of falls into a routine. And that's true with, any kind of ensemble. You can look at the different things you want to hit every day and make sure that you have those scheduled. make sure you also leave time at the end of class, especially towards the beginning of the year when they're still getting used to where their instruments go, packing up, cleaning out their instruments. You want to make sure you give them time to pack up and care for their instruments. And you don't want to feel rushed. I always want to keep them. I want to keep them as long as I can because I have so much I want to get done. But it's also important that you have that time at the end of class to prepare for your next class so the next class can have a good start. So at the beginning of the year, I think it's really important that you give yourself time in between classes to be prepared for the next class. And my goal is always that my students can run their own class. And usually by about mid-October, that's where we are. And so when we have to miss, I always have sub-lesson plans because you never know when there's an emergency. But when I know that I'm going to be out for a music conference or for something like that, I have the students completely run the class, and I just give the substitutes instructions that the kids are going to take care of it, and they can just sit back and deal with any problems that might come up. And the kids know exactly what to do all the way through class. And that's because we do the same thing every single day. So the fact that the kids can do that shows you that you've got a good class routine established.
Nice. And something that I would recommend too is always having some fillers on hand so that if you get through your big lesson plan and still have some time at the end, have something ready to go. When I was teaching band and orchestra, I would pull out the method book with the CD. And so if we had time at the end of class, I'd say, okay, everybody back to page 5. Let's see what we've learned. And we use it as review time. And now that I'm in elementary, I have a cup. It's just like a little plastic cup with like popsicle sticks. And on each of the popsicle sticks, I have a song that we've learned. So at the end of class, it's just review time. I let a child pick out which song it is, and we get to do that singing game. So always having lots of good stuff so that, I mean, because there's nothing worse than hitting, you've finished up your lesson plan and you've got 10 minutes and you've got 24 second graders staring at you like, what are we going to do, Miss Jones?
Right. I feel like that never happens to me. I would love to feel like I have extra time, but yeah, you never know when something is just not going to go as expected. So you definitely want to have different backups for that.
Yeah, totally. Elementary. I love it. All right. So number 6, prepare your celebrations. I love this one.
Yeah. So I feel like you want to make sure that you're having in-class celebrations, first of all. So we'll talk about some bigger group celebrations. But the reason I want to bring this up is because you might not have like a band party or a big thing going on in the first couple of weeks of school because of how busy it is. But make sure that you're celebrating with your kids in class. So what I do is with each group, whenever they reach a goal in class. So for example, on clarinet, it's a really big deal when we get everybody up to pitch on mouthpiece. And so the kids know that that's a big deal. I said that wrong. Their parents may not get what that is. So unlike when they win a soccer game and they go home and tell mom and dad and their mom and dad are excited, if they go home and say, hey, mom, I got up to pitch on mouthpiece, their parents are going to have no idea what they're talking about. So it's really important in your band program that you create a culture of excitement when that kind of thing happens and everyone in the class gets to celebrate. So that may just be like, yay, everybody claps and great job and you go on. Or it might be you have some kind of special celebration in class for that. So don't feel like you have to always have every group celebrating at the same time. Don't feel like it has to be always a band party. You can just within your class have, celebrate achievement together. Another time with that on clarinet is when we can all play down to the bottom of the clarinet, play down to low E. I can't tell you how excited I was this year when that happened. The kids were like, shocked. I was so excited. I was in the best mood they'd ever seen me in, and they didn't quite get it, but it helped them be more excited because I was excited for them. So kind of make the ordinary extraordinary and be real excited for them about that.
Yeah. And then anytime we're working on a new concept and you end up, being successful with it. I remember with my 5th graders, I was working on we're singing and getting them all to sing their E nice and round, and when they all hit it and they could hear how their tones were matching and it like filled up the whole room with sound. And one of my favorite little celebrations is to do air high fives because I can air high five like the whole classroom at the same time.
Yes.
It's fun.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. And then also, you want to prepare some big celebrations as well. So, you can have kind of welcome back parties, or you can have different activities through the year. You can have a big holiday party. You can have different, one thing we used to do that was fun. I just thought of this when I said holiday. We used to let the kids come in and decorate for holidays too. So like around Halloween, if they wanted to bring in Halloween decorations, they would come in and decorate the band hall. And that created a culture of like excitement and celebration as well. But you want to have specific band get-togethers. You want them to feel like band is a family and they're part of that social group. Social things are so important for kids in middle school and high school especially. And so just make sure that you give them opportunities to really feel that bond so that they want to stay and be a part of that all the way through high school.
Yeah. And one thing I did with my elementary students, I teach 10 different classes. So I have 10 plastic cups, and every day they have the opportunity of earning 5 just little puff balls. I call them warm fuzzies. And so if they're really good that day, they get all 5 into their cup. And when their cup is filled, then they get to have a party. So it gets the whole class working together, and it's really fun.
What kind of things do you do for those parties? Are they just like special treats during your class time?
Yeah, I do it during class time, and I do Just Dance. So I put up a YouTube video, and they all get to dance along.
Okay.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's pretty fun. Sometimes I'll throw in like some of the older kids, I'll let them choose. We can do either donuts and dancing. So I bring up in donuts and then we just dance to YouTube videos. Or I let them choose like a movie, and instead of watching the movie like beginning to end, we'll just watch the musical numbers.
Okay.
And I will actually pause and like give them commentary about it. So it's still, both ways are really educational, because for the younger kids, the number one thing for little kids who can't, really focus on tone quality, I focus on pulse. Like the number one thing is maintaining that steady pulse.
Yes.
And that's why doing dancing is so helpful, because it's a full body pulse movement. And I've just having that focus over the last 3 years, you can start to see it in the kids. It's amazing.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things. I'm a weirdo elementary teacher. I think that it should be fun, but I also test them every quarter just to see where they're coming along, and I test them on the exact same skills. So I like test them on, can they maintain a steady beat? Can they hear high and low pitch? Can they match pitch? Things like that. So anyway,
Great.
But I keep the celebrations so they're educational too.
Yeah.
All right, so quick review. Number 1, plan your curriculum requirements, get them laid out on your calendar. Number 2, consider your classroom layout. Number 3, sequencing, making sure that you've got it all, step by step out. Number 4, being prepared, having all the supplies you need on hand. Number 5, have a thorough lesson plan template and a solid routine. Number 6, prepare your celebrations. And our last one is mitigate risk. This means collecting a lot of data. So I was just talking about how I test my students. That is data that I collect every single quarter. And so at the end of the year, I can show them, their classroom teachers, the principal, their parents, exactly how far they have come over the course of that year. So being prepared and collecting lots of data. What do you think, Tamari?
Yes, I love that too. We do a lot of things that are either called playoffs, or the school I'm going to be at next year calls them benchmarks, but where the students need to, perform something at a certain level. And if they're not able to do it, then they just keep trying to do it until they can do it. So we have that. I do lots of playing grades, playing tests, things like that. We also do lots of in-class tryouts where they're moving chairs or different things like that. So I do a lot of down the row accountability, and I do tend to track a lot of that for just for, again, accountability for me. So it's accountability for the students and then also accountability for me. I specifically like the pass-offs and the benchmarks, because then you have those assessments, but you also are telling every kid, if you can't do it yet, that's okay, but you're going to keep coming in until you can do it. So I like doing that. I also think, communicating really well with parents throughout the year and administration is really helpful with that, not just about grades and things, but about calendar issues and what's expected and things with money being due and things like that. You want to make sure that really you almost have to over communicate. I will tell you, as a parent, I feel like we get a lot of communication. Like my kids' teachers have had amazing communication, and I still will miss stuff because we're in this age of just so much information all the time that we almost get so much we miss stuff. So you have to just over communicate, make sure you're telling parents in a number of ways, email, social media, through the kids, give them handouts, all those kinds of things. And then just be prepared that there's still going to be some kid that is going to say they didn't get it, or some parent that's going to be upset. But you want to document as much as you can. These are the 3 or 4 ways that I sent home the information, and the kids, they had it. So the more that you can communicate, and then just, be prepared to have to over communicate nowadays.
Right. So some tips. I love having a digital and a paper file for each student. That way you can just easily organize them when you have parent-teacher conferences, or if you have a parent, asking why their kid got a grade in your class, you can quickly and easily justify that. And also keeping track of behavior issues that students may have. Add that to their file. If they've been disciplined in your class, then you can always track that back. And if it ends up getting worse, then you can take them to the administration and say, here are the exact dates and here's exactly what happened. And that's really great information for them. It's a great way for you to advocate for your students with your administration. And also keeping track of your enrollment numbers and budgets and parent volunteers and parent volunteer hours, because volunteer hours matter a lot. I want to make sure that you keep an email list and use it frequently to get information out. Like Tamara just said, the more ways you can get it out, because some people aren't going to look at their emails, but they are going to look through their kids' backpacks and vice versa. And I always put things in our school newsletter too, because that's just what the parents are always sure to read. We didn't talk about it, but having a handbook or a rubric. No, not rubric. What's it called? The thing at the beginning of the year that everybody has to send home and sign.
Most of the people around here call it a handbook, code of conduct within the handbook, possibly.
Yeah. Okay, we'll just call it a handbook.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's helpful. And you had mentioned on the tracking discipline, that made me think about when I don't feel like I have the same. I don't know, in band, we just track, I use the name tags and I use some things like that for discipline. I don't usually really have discipline issues, but with elementary, I didn't have grades. We just had, the conduct grade. And so I tracked the conduct more as part of my data. And I had, like I said, they all had assigned seats, and then I had a grid chart for each class that would help me with names, but it also had space, and I could write down a little code. So like if I had trouble with a kid talking, I would put a T, and I would just keep track of that. And then I could look back at that at the end of the 6 weeks or 9 weeks and have some documentation of, where, if we had problems. And it wasn't as much for the grade as, like you were saying, if down the road it got worse and I needed to document we had these problems, instead of saying, well, I've been having trouble for 3 weeks with him in class, I'm able to say, well, there were 3 times where I had to, remind him to stop talking. There were 2 times he was touching a student next to him, whatever. And so it gives you consistency. So in elementary, I think it's important to keep track too. Sometimes when you don't see him as often, it feels like you can just kind of wing it and keep them under control a little bit. But then when it goes on for a number of weeks, you kind of wish you'd had that tracking from the beginning.
Yeah, I love that idea of having a grid and a seating chart and being able to just quickly write on it. I hate having to take time out from my class to do that, but it's really necessary.
Yeah, and I kept it right on my desk, and it was super quick to grab. And what's interesting is when I would pick it up, I didn't tell them sometimes who I was marking. I would just pick it up and I would make a mark, and the class would get dead silent because they knew, okay, something's going on. And then, so it actually, instead of me having to stop and correct the kid, I would just stop and mark it and we'd go on. So it didn't feel like it took a lot more time because of the way I had it, ready to go.
Nice. And they were super in tune with what you were trying to do.
Yes.
Nice. Well, let's just review all of these 7 things that you should have in your mind as you're macro planning your school year for success. Number 1, we talked about planning your curriculum and laying it out on your calendar. Number 2, consider your classroom layout, making sure that you've got a place for the backpacks and ins and outs and everything. Number 3, sequencing. How are you going to teach things step by step? Number 4, being prepared with all of your supplies and music copied and sub-lesson plans. Number 5, have a thorough lesson plan template and a solid routine, even to the point where your kids could be the ones to run the class, which I love that. Number 6, prepare your celebrations, both in-class celebrations that are small, little high fives, to parties as rewards, especially for, concert. Awesome stuff. Okay. And number 7, mitigate risk by collecting lots of data and over communicating. Is there anything else that we should have in mind for the beginning of the school year?
I would just say that no matter how much you plan, you're still working with kids and you're still going to have things that come up that you're not expecting. So especially for new teachers, just expect the unexpected and be forgiving of yourself. If something happens or something comes up that you messed up on, it's okay. It happens to everybody. And just, recover as quickly as you can and keep going. But just really give yourself some grace there at the beginning of the year because, things are going to happen. So be prepared for the unprepared.
Totally. So we will have some good stuff in the show notes, lots of support materials, and probably a checklist that you can download as well. So be sure to pick those up. And thank you so much to Tamarie for being here and talking about macro planning your school year. And thank you so much for listening. That wraps up our macro planning advice for today. If you want to access the download, show notes with links, and any of the other goodies that come along with this episode, you can find them on the smartmusic.com blog. Just do a search for keyword 004 or go to professionalmusiceducator.com/podcast. If you have advice about the beginning of the school year, we'd love to hear it. Just leave a comment at the bottom of the show notes. While you're there, sign up for your free Smart Music account and give it a try. Don't forget to share this podcast with a friend, subscribe, and leave us a rating. Let's make sure every music educator in the country has access to this resource. We can't get enough, right? Coming up in the next 2 episodes, we'll be talking about one of the major factors that goes into your teaching job, your relationship with your bosses. You might be shocked at some of the statistics we'll be presenting and relieved at some of the advice we give. You won't want to miss it. Until then, keep smiling and keep teaching on.